everyone. So nice to meet you all. Today we're really excited to speak with you a little bit about the research partnership that we've cultivated across product and marketing in the various departments at Alma. I'm Libby Perold. I lead product design at Alma.
And I'm Amy McNerney. I lead product marketing research here at Alma.
So before getting into Alma specifically, we were hoping to take a step back and really take a look at the distinctions between UX versus marketing research, as well as perhaps more crucially, the overlaps. So starting a little bit to take a look at our methods, specifically within UX, we tend to look at smaller sample sizes. So what that means is that the goal is not to necessarily drive towards statistical significance, but instead actually understanding our learning goals and really speaking with enough people who can drive towards that learning goal. In terms of qual versus quant, again, this is a very generalized view, but we tend to take a slightly longer look at qualitative data, really trying to drive towards those very deep insights about user behaviors, user needs, how they're exactly using the product. Ideally, we're pairing that with quantitative data, so actually leveraging product analytics and bigger data sets to actually take a look at that quantitative piece of how people are behaving. But on the UX side, really driving at that qualitative piece. And then lastly, and again, very much a generalization and not true to every product, but definitely true to Alma today, is that we are typically looking at our current customer base. So actually evaluating the usage and the way that our current customers are interacting with the product.
And on the marketing side, again, this is a more generalized view, but we do tend to skew more quantitative in what we're looking for, seeking out those more robust sample sizes so that we can kind of understand broader trends in behaviors, attitudes, perceptions. Though qual does still have its place in our research for sure, we'll often include open ends in our quant surveys to add texture to those stats, and we'll utilize qual methods like focus groups and interviews and things when we need to dig a little deeper or go a little more in depth. And then the other bigger difference here is going to be the audience. While we do regular research with our current users and customers, we'll also tap prospective customers for our research as well, because we want to gain a sense of the entire market, not just our customer base.
And so naturally, each of those methods are laddering up to distinct goals. So on the UX side, typically what we're trying to do is really understand how users are behaving and thinking in the product. So that might look like journeys, pain points, mental models, trying to really frame their understanding of the concepts that we're delivering. Ultimately, that's in service of inspiring design-centric and user-centric products, where we would be wanting to test into their level of usability, learnability, and intuitiveness.
And on the market research side, we're wanting to get that understanding of our consumers more broadly. So understanding their wants, needs, beliefs, motivation, what they're willing to pay for, and all of that kind of stuff at this sort of market level. We're looking at sizing the market. We're evaluating our competitive landscape, considering sort of what people think of Alma, for example, compared to our competitors. And then we're also evaluating these trends and sort of satisfaction within our customer base to make sure that we're delivering on our proposition to our current customers. So leveraging like satisfaction and NPS surveys internally. And ultimately, like, again, what this ladders up to and is in service of is having a better understanding of our audience so that we can communicate to them more effectively and identify opportunities for us to improve their experience with us. And while we may differ in some research approaches and objectives, it's important to recognize that both market research and UX often are pulling from the sort of same research toolbox. So there's a fair amount of overlap in how we do the research. We both use these methods of online surveys, interviews and focus groups, persona segmentation, competitor analysis, and stories to some degree, just kind of depending on what the objective is and the goal of the research.
Which leads very closely into our shared goals. So ultimately, both functions are really trying to understand who our users are and what they need. And we're trying to translate that understanding into action. So typically what we are trying to do is testing design concepts or maybe even language concepts, programs that might not have a visual, for example. Really understanding where we fit in this competitive landscape, and then ultimately driving at user-friendly and customer-centric business decisions.
Great. Yeah. So now let's talk a little bit about how these two branches of research have kind of developed and taken shape here at Alma. First, taking a step back here to give more context and background on what Alma is and what we do. So our mission is to simplify access to high quality, affordable mental health care. And we do this by supporting providers in their practices, helping them run thriving in network, so through insurance, private practices. And our approach to this really is to put providers at the center of everything we do, to champion them in the healthcare system, because we believe that by making running their practice that much easier, providers are able to focus on what's really important, which is ultimately providing care to those in need. So again, taking this provider first approach, we feel that by supporting therapists, that trickle down effect will then, support their clients, as well as kind of improving the system for everyone. So that's all nice and good, but how exactly do we do that? We have kind of 4 core offerings. First is the insurance program. So again, helping providers get credentialed with insurance so they can take insurance from clients. And we kind of make that whole process streamlined with credentialing and submitting claims and billing and all of that. We offer them tools to power their practice. So things like scheduling, billing, payment, documentation, also that those things can kind of run smoothly and securely for them. And we also offer practice growth opportunities. Our members are included in our directory, which gives them access to referrals and high intent partnerships, which they can opt into. And then finally, this kind of sense of community and opportunities through community. We give our providers opportunity to connect with each other peer-to-peer. And we also offer professional development through events and programming, as well as ongoing member support. So since we've started out in this mission, Alma has undergone immense growth. Looking back, even just comparing 2020 to 2023, we had in 2020, 200 providers. We were available in 1 state and had 25 employees. And now we serve 11,000 providers. We're available in 50 states and have over 400 employees. So this growth really drives home the importance of our research goals, right? So on the one hand, we want to be making sure we're basing our business decisions in this extremely fast-paced environment on data and feedback from our users and trends that we're seeing in this also rapidly evolving kind of market and industry. And then even just looking at the numbers, with each day, the results of the work that we're doing has the potential to impact more and more people every day.
So to take a look back exactly what that scale looked like over the last 3 years, we thought we would take you through a couple of different stages of that growth. So going back to stage 1, when we were a pretty small team, I call this small, scrappy, and integrated because while the team was small, we had to really work together. And I would say even from the get-go, product research and marketing research were really working together hand in hand. And so what you can see here on the left, this is an example of a dual NPS survey and concept test that we were running with our client audience. So this is the group of people who are both looking for mental health care and receiving mental health care once they find it. Specifically, what our marketing team led was an NPS survey to really understand how satisfied they were with our products and services and any opportunities for growth. Whereas I, on the product side, tend to take a lead in terms of understanding expectations of solutions, driving forth that idea of testing out some concepts of what the care finding experience could look like, and then understanding where the product could grow from there. What you can see on the right, at the time, we were doing a little bit of documentation. So we were trying to be quite building a habit in terms of writing things down, understanding what we were learning, even documenting those learning goals, even in the early days. That said, we did have a shared context. And at the time, we were a much smaller team, all co-located in the same offices in New York. So it did look a little bit quite less formal in terms of the way sharing looked. But we were trying to build up that habit in process of writing down what we were learning and then sharing it back to the rest of the company. The second stage is what I call more people are here. And this is the stage that tends to align both with the announcement of our Series B, but also the arrival of a couple of key functions. So specifically, the arrival of product management and product marketing. And so what we had to do at this stage was to get a lot more formal relatively to the way that we approached our research process and framework. So at the time, we were starting to take a big step back, thinking about general product development frameworks, rolling out discovery and delivery cycles, and then thinking a lot about how research fit into that cycle across the board. We also started asking ourselves the question of how do we actually get in front of our users on a more regular basis? Can we actually spin up a quick Google form for panel recruitment, for example? At the time, because many more people arrived at around that moment, we also had to get a lot more clear and crisp on our roles. And so actually starting to identify swim lanes and who owns what in the product and marketing research processes. And then a little bit similar to that prior stage around documentation, but quite a bit more crisp here as well. So taking that enhanced focus on documentation, not just of the research work itself, so actually identifying note takers and moderators for each session, but also going back to this idea of process memos, getting a lot clearer about how we reach different audiences and what we feel comfortable doing with perhaps our more internally facing provider audience versus that more externally facing consumer audience.
So where are we at today? We call this stage 3, scaling with increased sophistication. So at this point, we now have even more people in the company, more people doing research, including me, which is our first dedicated market researcher role. So in this phase, we're really looking at scaling in a few key areas. One of those being process. So again, just building on some of the foundations that were laid in stages 1 and 2, introducing a customer insights panel, which gives us easier access to customers through a dedicated platform, and they're kind of more engaged with research, so kind of creating an easier process there for reaching our members. Our all company research log is part of our research process, where anytime you're running a project, you log it here and it becomes visible across the company. So kind of socializing and creating greater visibility there. And then our research repository, which is where we sort of store project-related documentation with the aim of sort of creating more accessible materials. And then scaling our methods. So like we've talked about, we started with only 200 providers that we were doing research with originally, and that has expanded to 11,000. So some of our methods that we were approaching, for example, our member satisfaction survey that were more qualitative, we've now transitioned into some quantitative measures that were informed by the qual from previous quarters. But now that we have 700, 800 completions per survey, we're able to leverage these quantitative questions to measure and track quarter over quarter with a bit more robustly than trying to hand code 700 responses. And then similarly on the product side, creating more sort of templatized and standardized methods. So we have, for example, our feature perception survey, which is launched after a new update or feature is launched. And again, just creating this sort of standardized process to make it easier for different people to do the research, but also creating more consistency across so that we can compare more apples to apples across our feature launches and things, just giving us a greater pool of data and context to be able to derive learnings from and move things forward. And then another area where we're scaling with this sophistication is our communications. So what we're trying to do is share findings across multiple channels and meet people where they're at, right? So we have introduced recently a monthly newsletter that is a collaboration between Libby and myself. And this, again, just resurfaces insights that have been shared prior to the release of the newsletter, but is a great way to kind of, resurface, remind people of some of those things that are going on, may trigger things in that moment that didn't occur to them when they first reviewed those findings. So again, just kind of keeping the research top of mind for people as much as possible by giving them an additional touch point with it. And then in terms of when we do share out the initial findings, we are leaning more towards like an async kind of culture here. So a lot of the time, rather than having a single presentation that's a moment in time, we'll do like a recording of the presentation via Loom, share that out. People can review it on their own time, add commentary, emoji reactions as they're viewing. So it still allows for that engagement. And then we can have like office hours that follow that up as well, so that if they do want to interact with the presentation and the results on a live platform, they still have the opportunity to do so. And then in terms of another area we're scaling is this sort of research foundations and training of the team. So like we said, more people are doing research, so we need to make the foundations and more accessible to people so that we can ensure the quality of research that we're doing is consistent across as more people start engaging. So we're creating documentation to kind of instill some of those foundations and best practices. So what this has essentially given way to is an environment where research is kind of always on. You can see in a given quarter, we could have multiple projects running and overlapping with each other. And this is where the communication really becomes key, so that we're not being redundant with each other, but we're also kind of being agile in how we're conducting the research and taking into account what we already know, and so that we're building on top of what our knowledge rather than, again, being redundant with it.
Yeah, so Amy just spoke a little bit about the tools and methods that we really are using today to do research, but we thought it would also be valuable to try and show the way that the people behind the research are organized in our company today at Alma. So on the product side, each product team is organized into what we call cross-functional squads. And each of those squads are comprised of a series of engineers, engineering managers, product designers, product managers, and product marketers as well. Typically, that work is driven by the product designers when it comes to research work. That said, the squad is really the one who owns their own roadmap. So it's really looks like very heavy involvement and collaboration, typically on the product side of things, with the product designer, product manager, and product marketer coming together to really look at those goals and understand how do we drive forth decision-making on those goals through research. My own role in the squads, naturally the designers report into me, so I'm responsible for ensuring that the research is high quality, that we're asking open-ended and non-leading questions in the research work that we're doing every day, as well as really taking a look at those kind of cross-team and cross-cutting processes. So any opportunity to roll out updates to our incentive structure, for example, or the way that we get in front of our provider and client audience, that's something that I'm typically taking a look at. In the spirit of communicating back out across the organization, I'm typically on a monthly basis, like Amy mentioned, where we're putting together that newsletter. So I'm compiling insights from across the teams and then reporting that back out to marketing, to leadership, and the rest of product and engineering as well, really to drive that clarity.
And then on the marketing research side of things, we now have this dedicated product marketing researcher position, which kind of sits at the center of the marketing research structure here, which is me. And while like my core goal and kind of role is around fielding and proposing projects that are either requests into me or I may be proposing them out to different teams. Those kind of do typically stick within the marketing realm. So we have like sub teams within marketing, and depending on the need, it could be a request coming from one of the sub teams or from leadership, which could be across different teams that expands outside of marketing, but likely has, if I'm being looped in, likely has implications for marketing. So again, that's kind of like where I sit. I'm either owning the project or consulting on it, whether it's survey design or approach and methodology or analysis. And then in terms of reporting, the insights out, it's similar to what Libby was saying, where we, even if the request or project originated in a sub team of marketing, for example, we'll share it out more broadly than that to make sure that any insights that could have implications for other teams are being surfaced to those folks and disseminated appropriately. The other thing I'll say too here is that a lot of the times we'll include people from these different teams as well as like consultants on it, or like a consulted role or an informed role as the project is developing. So it's not always necessarily just at the end, right? We may bring them in to just keep them informed of what's happening and developing there.
So the last part here, just on the organization, I mean, what we just presented seemingly looks like two pretty distinct and separate organizations. But in reality, if we were to zoom in, it's actually a lot more fluid than that. So like I mentioned, in product and engineering, we actually do have this role of a product marketer embedded in the squad. And that key role is very important in terms of making sure Amy is looped in on the work that we're doing, as well as vice versa, bringing together a lot of Amy's insights that she's gathering back to the team. Naturally, Amy and I are working together very, very closely, thinking about not just insights we're seeing generally, but thinking about those kind of cross-cutting and foundational processes for research. And then the last part, like Amy mentioned, is also the level of async that we've leaned into really makes research quite inclusive at Alma, because we're seeing a lot of engagement and tagging across the reports that we're generating, whether that's in a Google Doc or a slide deck. You might see a PM being tagged in some of the member satisfaction reports that Amy is putting out, and then vice versa in some of the concept tests or validation that my team is putting out, then Amy getting tagged vice versa. So just trying to comment on the fact that this is actually a lot more fluid in reality than necessarily the two distinct organizations we presented.
Okay, so to wrap things up, we just want to give you some specific ideas and takeaways to kind of walk away from this with, some tips and tricks that we've developed over our time here at Alma. So first, I would say never underestimate the power of a good quote, right? Quotes and video clips are valuable and compelling shared currency. Bringing the voice of the customer to your teams can not only create more appetite for research, but it helps humanize the customer and sort of build empathy there, right? We often leverage quotes in our newsletter and clips and things in our reports. And like we've talked about, a lot of the time that's where the engagement is happening. Like a lot of comments will be around, oh, this is an interesting quote that someone said, or this, let's follow up on this. Is this, do you see this anywhere else? So they're just a little stickier, in terms of bringing people in and getting them to engage with the content. And of course, amplifying the voice of the customer is always great and sparks interest and engagement. So definitely leverage those as much as you can.
Secondly, we wanted to talk about the importance of really taking findings outside of the tactical day-to-day, especially of product implications. So when we're running a usability test or a concept validation survey, actually trying to show the way that they might extend outside of the day-to-day of product. So I thought that this would be best illustrated with an example. What you can see here on the left is actually an example slide from a readout I did back in 2021, really trying to understand people's care finding experience. So the people who are looking for care and therapy, what does it really look like? And I think we had started with this assumption that it looked a lot more like a funnel of considering therapy, finding the right provider, and then booking an appointment. But in reality, the road is quite a bit more bumpy. And so what you can see here a little bit more on the bottom is that we saw people were starting therapy, stopping therapy, starting it up again, finding a bad fit, and then trying all over again over a multi-year horizon. And so what was a pretty cool example of this is that by taking this out of the day-to-day tactics of the product, it ended up inspiring a creative ad campaign that our marketing team ran with. So what they were able to do is actually take that insight and reflect it back to the people who were finding care through our advertising.
Okay, and then another pointer here is to kind of look at how your organization is designed. Is it built to share these goals? Just reiterating, finding those connectors and those people who will kind of advocate for research, have that hunger for it, and will help drum up interest in it across teams. And yeah, just again, emphasizing those connectors can be great for forging those bridges across different teams. And then lastly, really quickly, Alma's core values are something that we definitely have channeled through our research. And that's always something to look to see where research can plug in, as well as your norms and habits. So one of our core values is listening first, and that's something that we definitely take to heart and try to live out through our research. Listening first to our end customers and bringing that voice to the people who have the power to impact their experience with our product and services. And then in terms of norms and habits, we've talked about this, but just to drive it home again, our company kind of leans more async, so creating reports that are more living documents where people can engage and tag and continue and have discussion rather than having to be restricted to a single presentation, for example, can really help build that engagement. And again, just whether or not that's how your company functions is taking that into account when you're trying to engage people and get that cross-functional engagement from everyone. Okay.
And so we just wanted to leave, I think we're at time, but just wanted to leave you all with a quote from our own user base, just showing the importance of research. It's been very valuable over the last couple of years, and we're excited to see where we can grow from here. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. This was fantastic.